Welcome to this week's Nutrition Science Bites. My guest for you today is Dr. Katherine Brain. Catherine's an accredited practicing dietitian. She's also a lecturer in nutrition at the University of Newcastle, but Katherine holds roles with a number of pain-related organisations like Chronic Pain Australia, the Australian Research Solutions Alliance, that one's a mouthful, Australian Pain Society, as well as Dietitians Australia. And did I already mention you did your PhD on nutrition and pain? So welcome today, Katherine.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
I really wanted to get you on the podcast because I think pain and the relationship with nutrition isn't really well recognised. And I know that you're passionate about this topic. So I wanted to ask you first, like, what is chronic pain and why don't people really know about it?
Yeah, so chronic pain is a condition or pain that persists beyond 3 months, and it can be sort of attributed to a variety of different things. So it might be an injury after a motor vehicle accident that doesn't sort of the physical injuries might heal, but the pain would persist beyond that. It can also be related to diseases like arthritis, and about 1/3 of people who experience chronic pain don't actually have an obvious cause for that pain. So regardless of how the pain sort of starts, it's really these changes to the body, so the nervous system, endocrine system, immune system becomes quite hypersensitive. So sometimes describe it like the pain system becoming hypersensitive. So your smoke alarm might go off when you burn your toast, but if it goes off every time you make toast, that's when it becomes a bit of a problem. So our bodies are really good at detecting pain. It protects us from danger, but when it keeps going off all the time, that's when it becomes an issue.
Yeah, that really makes sense. I like that analogy that you used about the smoke alarm. And if every time, the smoke alarm went off just because you're making toast, you're not burning it, that's pretty frustrating. And
Yeah.
so how common is it then? Like, do very many people in Australia experience chronic pain and are living with chronic pain?
Yeah. So in Australia and around the world, and this is the same for both children and adults, it's about 1 in 5 or about 20% of the population will
Wow.
experience chronic pain. Yeah. So
I didn't
it's
realize it
it's
was that high.
yeah, so it's very likely that if you don't experience pain yourself, you probably know someone who does.
And so what is that relationship then between pain and nutrition? And which is the chicken, which is the egg?
Yeah, and how long is a piece of string, really? I suppose if you look at it from the direction of pain influencing nutrition, pain can make it quite difficult to do things like shop, prepare, and cook meals. If you're experiencing pain, and I see this a bit clinically as well, a lot of people will only eat one meal a day because they either don't have the energy or motivation to prepare the food or even just eat. It's not something that interests them anymore. And it's not just the sort of musculoskeletal pain, it can be things like pain in the stomach or digestive system that will cause symptoms like nausea and vomiting and constipation and diarrhea. It can be pelvic pain. So there's quite a lot of issues that I suppose can influence the way we eat if you're experiencing pain.
Yeah, I
On the
imagine,
flip side,
Catherine, I imagine if you get pain every time you eat, that hardly bodes well for staying well nourished. That must
yeah,
be very
absolutely.
debilitating.
Yeah, and people who either get pain when they're eating or, they're being sick every time they eat, it's a real turn off. You don't want to eat then, and trying to, establish some regular eating is quite important in that situation.
So when you're working with people then who are experiencing chronic pain, yeah, what approach do you take? Like, how do you go about, working out what advice to provide?
Yeah, I suppose there's two different things I look at. The first one is that sort of irregular eating patterns. And as I said, that can be because of the digestive symptoms. It might even be because of avoidant eating patterns or eating disorder behaviors. So it's looking at that first step around establishing a regular eating pattern to help the digestive system function a little bit better and provide that sustained sort of energy over time. If someone's doing well with that, then it's looking at improving diet quality really to help reduce inflammation and build strength.
Yeah, well, that really makes sense. I don't think people necessarily realize that there's a relationship potentially between the nutritional quality or the nutrients in their food and things like inflammation. So maybe you could explain that a little bit, because I think some of the listeners might be going, inflammation, what's that got to do with pain?
Yeah, so when our body's sort of in a state of pain, we can have this sort of constant low level inflammation in the body. And that can be caused from environmental stress, but it can also be caused by the foods that we eat. But the good news is that you can reverse that by changing the types of foods that you eat as well. So things like I often say a rainbow of fruit and vegetables. So it's the antioxidants in the fruit and vegetables that help to reduce inflammation. And I think I remember you said once, Claire, that antioxidants are like the ball boys and girls in a tennis match. The tennis match can still go ahead without them, but it's much more efficient if they're there. So I really liked that sort of
Yeah,
analogy in explaining
some
what antioxidants are.
yeah, someone grabbing up those wayward tennis balls that are really going to cause a lot of trouble on a busy tennis court if they're not taken out of harm's way. And so the other thing I think for listeners that you and I know, but I don't think people necessarily realize that the bright colors in plants are because of those phytonutrients, and those phytonutrients generally have rich sources of antioxidant nutrients, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why it's often trying to increase the variety of colors within the fruit and veg, more so than increasing, say, the quantity, for example. I mean, they're both important, but I often will focus on the colors first than the
Yeah.
number of fruit and veg.
And I actually think that's an easier practical thing to remember, and whether you're putting a meal together or, you're ordering an online shop or you're actually at the shops yourself, that's kind of a one way, oh yeah, more bright colors is good news. So then the other thing,
Yeah.
sorry,
No, I was just going to say, I think it's easier to count the colors than to actually try and count the,
yeah,
number of serves or the quantity that's in the meal.
way, way easier
Mm.
maths to count and focus on colors. You don't even need maths that way. Now, the other thing
Yes,
is,
yes.
listeners, you are very, very lucky because Catherine's PhD research was all on nutrition and pain. So I wanted you to tell people about what you did in your research, which
Mm.
is how many years ago was that now that you graduated from your
Yeah, I
PhD?
finished about, it's probably 6 years ago now, I think.
6 years.
Yeah,
Seems like
yeah.
yesterday, everyone. So, okay, so perhaps you can just, tell us about your PhD and then the developments since your PhD, because yeah, 6 years goes too fast.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is really an emerging space. So I was really fortunate in my PhD to start building that evidence around nutrition and pain. And I think, looking at the literature was really interesting because it was the studies that looked at changing overall eating patterns and moving towards, say, a Mediterranean style of eating or a more plant-based style of eating. But also studies that looked at improving particular nutrients like the quality or type of protein and fats, which is another thing that's quite important. They were the studies that had the best sort of evidence in helping someone reduce their pain. So I think that was really important. And then developing an intervention. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and actually, when you think about that literature and the advice that you said you're giving now, that's still consistent, isn't it? Like the nutritional quality being associated with like better pain outcomes. Okay, now
Mm.
keep going,
Yeah.
because I
Yes.
think people will want to hear what you did next.
Yeah, so building that into an intervention where I would then as a dietitian see patients and provide some personalized advice. So talking about, I've mentioned the fruit and veg, sort of touched on protein, healthy fats. Other things are, avoiding dehydration that can make pain a lot worse, and also whole grains and fiber to feed our gut bugs and prevent constipation that can come alongside a lot of the medications that someone might be on when they're experiencing pain. But taking all of that as a bit of an education, but also working on some of those barriers. So that, like I've said, the shopping, preparing food and cooking food, and providing a personalized sort of dietary plan or advice for these people. We had very exciting results in that they were clinically meaningful. So there were reductions in pain interference. So whilst people might still experience pain, it didn't interfere with their day-to-day tasks as much. And their self-efficacy improved as well. So that was really exciting.
So what does the self-efficacy mean?
So they felt more able to do things. So they had more, I suppose, confidence and belief in themselves to be able to do day-to-day tasks.
Well, that's super, super interesting. And so what was next?
Well, that was sort of the wrap up of my PhD, and but then taking that into a clinical setting and trying to, particularly through some of the leadership roles, advocating for more comprehensive nutrition or more dietitians in the pain space as well. So trying to be building on that since my PhD, but also looking at some different areas. So how does this translate to, say, pelvic pain, for example, is another thing that I'm quite interested in too.
And have you seen that there are some differences in the type of advice for people living with different types of chronic pain then?
Um, I think again in the research space, it's still quite new. I think the difference, I suppose, with pelvic pain, particularly in relation to nutrition, is there is that increase of what might be described as irritable bowel syndrome type symptoms, and more of that restrictive or avoidant eating patterns just because of the nature of our organs and where they sit. Pelvic pain's more likely to be associated with that as well. But so is other conditions like fibromyalgia. We know that about 60% of people with fibromyalgia will also have irritable bowel symptoms, and about 75% of people with IBS will also have fibromyalgia like symptoms.
Wow, it sounds like there's really a lot to it. And
Mm.
of the people who have nutrition-related chronic pain, what would be the most common sort of patient group? Or is there one even?
Yeah, it's hard to pick. I mean, from a chronic pain perspective, the most common type of pain is back or neck pain, or
All
that
right.
sort of musculoskeletal pain. But then there's also, like I've said, that sort of, you know, internal organ related pain. But we can also have pain persist from cancer treatment. So it's very varied in terms of the ways that chronic pain can sort of come about, and nutrition would impact on all of those.
And so I wanted to ask you, if you're a person who's living with chronic pain and you're listening to this, you
Mm.
know, how would you get help? That's one question. But
Mm.
also, what level of improvement have you seen that people are able to make? Like, and by that I mean, does it get improvements to the level where people can reduce the amount of medications, for example?
I haven't seen it specifically in reducing medications from a clinical perspective. To the best pain management is working in a team. So it's not just nutrition, it's looking at, physical activity, the connections between emotions and things like that. But and it's all sort of the same type of messaging. It's the really small changes that you increase really slowly over time. So sort of pacing yourself and not, going from, say, one serve of vegetables to five serves of vegetables, because your body's going to go, oh, what's going on? So it's those slow and steady changes that suit the person, really, like an individualized approach, whether that is looking at fruit and veg or increasing regular meals, or doing some healthy swaps, so including some more healthy fats in the diet, for example.
Yeah. So from what you've seen with the clinical work you do, does this improve people's quality of life?
Yeah, absolutely. In both the research and in the clinical work I do, there's certainly improvements in people's day-to-day function, and that's something too that can be a bit tricky with pain. Is it, are you looking for a reduction in pain, or are you looking for, an improvement in your quality of life? So pain might stay the same, but if your function and quality of life improves, a lot of people find that that's really meaningful too.
Yeah, I'm sure being able to do more must make a huge difference to how you feel in yourself. So now
Yeah.
you mentioned about getting team care. How how do people actually do that then? Because and does that depend whether you live in a city, country, town, all of those things?
Yeah, so there's what's called, I suppose, the tertiary pain management centres, and you can get access to those through referral from a GP or a specialist. Quite a few of them will provide telehealth options, and I know particularly in New South Wales there are a couple of rural sites as well, so that it does break down some of those barriers. But in some of the advocacy work I do, it really is the awareness, accessibility, and affordability issues. So, trying to advocate to get pain management more into that community care and public health networks is something, one of my many side projects, working with consumer organisations to try and advocate to get more pain management access that's
Yeah.
affordable for the community.
Yeah, and that's really important. Now, just in case people are listening and they go, I want to find out more about this, are there particular websites you can go to? Because we can put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah. So for that sort of accessibility, affordability sort of piece, the work I do there is really through Chronic Pain Australia. And there is a website that I can share with you in the show notes as well. And they also have a PainLink phone line. So if anyone's wanting to get some more information or some advice about pain management, that's an option as well. I suppose finding a dietitian through Dietitians Australia would be a good place as well. And I can put a list of some of the pain services in the country in there as well too, if that helps.
Okay, we'll absolutely, definitely do that. And
Yeah.
one of the other topics I specifically wanted to ask you about is supplements. So, do people often come in and go, what about this? What about that? So, I thought maybe you
Yeah.
could tell us a bit about the questions you get asked and the supplements, and is there any research on that?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time myth busting, I think, as a lot of dietitians might do. So, in terms of supplements, the research is there's reasonably strong research for omega-3 supplements, particularly for someone with arthritis, and it's around 3,000 milligrams of omega-3 supplements per day, which is a fair bit. And you have to take it for about 3 months to see if it's going to have any impact on reducing that inflammatory sort of response in the body. But one thing I'd be mindful of too is to check with your GP. If you're going to go through and think about taking an omega-3 supplement, check with your GP, because if you're on other medication that thins the blood, it can be a little bit problematic. So, yeah.
Are there any other
Um,
ones that where there is evidence for? And then I'm going to ask you to tell us ones where there's no evidence.
Yes, yeah, yeah. The other ones, I think, and this is the research shows that there's a deficiency of vitamin D and magnesium in a lot of people who experience pain. But it comes back to what you said earlier about the chicken or the egg. It's not really clear what comes first. But taking supplements for those can help with some of the particularly musculoskeletal related pain. And particularly with vitamin D, if you're experiencing pain and isolating more and not getting out, you're not getting that sunlight too that helps with vitamin D. So there are a couple that have some evidence for supplementation and less likely to cause side effects. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's two things that I think are interesting about those. You need vitamin D for proper immune function, so that's
Mm.
important. And yeah, and sometimes I think if you're not getting out, you really won't be getting the sun. And then
Mm.
I'll put a link in the show notes, Catherine, to another podcast we recorded on vitamin B6 toxicity, because
Mm.
what a lot of people don't realize is that magnesium can contain B6, and some people end up with too much of that. So that's a caution about checking what else is in the supplement. You think you're taking one thing, but you could be getting something that could be contributing to what's called peripheral neuropathy or pain in your fingers and
Yeah.
toes.
And I've seen
So
that a couple of times in practice because sometimes, like vitamin B, generally speaking, is another one that some people will take for chronic pain because it helps improve the nervous system. But then I have seen some people that are taking too much B6, which causes pain and that peripheral neuropathy. So it's being really careful about the type of supplement that you're taking, as you said.
yeah, well, maybe that's another thing why that dietetic review would be important because, if people tell
Mm.
you all the things they're taking, then you can offer supportive advice and also recommendations when no, this one's really not recommended or the dose you're on is too high. So what are there any sort of weird and wonderful ones and I think you can totally understand if you're living with chronic pain, and there's something out there that works why people are more susceptible, I think, to inappropriate advice as well. So are there any other ones where you'd say, hey, no, go and get yourself checked by your doctor and your dietitian, hopefully?
Yeah, there's quite a few out there that doesn't that people think might be helpful, but there's not a lot of strong evidence. So things like turmeric is one example. So turmeric is anti-inflammatory, but the amount that you actually need is very high. It's not always absorbed, so you might hear to have black pepper alongside that helps with absorption. But by the time you do all of that, it's not effective at a sort of population level. So some individuals might have some response to that. So I kind of think it's a bit trial and error because you don't want to be going and paying all this money for a supplement that may or may not work for you. And if it doesn't, you could invest that money in something else, like seeing a dietitian, for example.
Can I also say it may or may not be palatable? The thought of,
Mm,
a lot of turmeric and a lot of black pepper might not be so palatable. But, just going back to your point about the rainbow and,
mm.
pepper and all herbs and spices are all actually plants, in fact. So what about adding more of them to the foods you're eating? Will that sort of help with your rainbow?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like I try and always make it a food first approach in a clinical setting too. And there's a really good like gut health resource that I sometimes give people around, the 30 plants a week type thing. And there is a big section in there on herbs and spices because people think, oh, 30 plants a week, that's going to be really hard to get to. But when you put in all the herbs and spices that you might cook with, it doesn't seem so, overwhelming.
And Catherine, that is really great because there's actually a couple of medical conditions now where people are talking about, oh, you've got to promote the variety of plants. And I mean, apart
Mm,
from for general health and well-being, that is really good advice. But um, we have a link in the show notes to the healthy eating quiz. Most of the points in that quiz come from weekly variety of plants, vegetables,
mm.
fruits, and whole grains. And then your herbs and spices are like a bonus on top of that. So we'll have the link to that in there as well.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything else that you think people living with chronic pain should know before we start talking about the recipe you're going to give us for No Money No Time website?
Yeah, I think, look, living with pain, and I do have some personal experience with that, which is why I'm so passionate about it, can be quite disheartening and debilitating. I think remembering that there is hope out there and there is work being done in this space to, keep things moving forward. The best evidence for pain management is hard work, but so is living with pain, I think. So if you're, you know, thinking about how you might be able to help with pain management, looking at some of these points, as I said, not like nutrition is really important, but thinking, as well about physical activity, our thoughts and emotions, our connection to, our relationships, our purpose, what we're interested in, what we enjoy. I've seen people in clinic who listen to music in the clinic and, they're in severe pain beforehand and you can hold a conversation with them after or while the music's playing because it's, that sort of connection within them. So I think, yeah, there's hope. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really sounds like, from what you said too, working out if you're not already tapped into one of those services that offer that sort of holistic wraparound service, then tracking one down, and
Mm.
and through Chronic Pain Australia website, people could get that direction. Is that what you said? And Pain Australia?
Yeah. So yeah, I can certainly put a list of services, or send you a list of services to put in the show notes. And there's some other community or peer support options available through Chronic Pain Australia. If you're wanting to talk to someone who lives with pain as well, sometimes that can be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll definitely add those in there. And then the recipe that you've provided us, Catherine, and this, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but we now call this after you. So this is going to be Dr. Catherine's
Yeah.
Rainbow Pizza. Can you tell us about that and why you picked it?
Yeah, a few different reasons. One, because it's something really quick and easy that I go to when I'm not feeling like cooking something. But I find in clinic too, a lot of other patients seem to appreciate it as well. So it's essentially a 4 ingredient recipe. You get a whole grain sort of pizza base or wrap, throw on a bunch of the frozen mixed vegetables. I tend to go for like a Mediterranean style mix because it has those flavors in it. Oh, I missed the sauce. I usually put a bit of sauce on first, a barbecue sauce or smoky barbecue sauce, and then put some cheese on top, and throw it in the oven, and it's done in about 20 minutes.
That sounds like something that you'd be able to prepare faster than anyone could, turn up at your door. You could ring
Oh,
up, order
yeah,
something, and they're at your door. So that's really great. So that's going to be on
yeah,
the website on No Money No Time, and we'll have a link to that
yeah,
through the podcast
yeah,
as well through the show notes. Well,
yeah.
Catherine,
And uh,
before we head up, I was just going to say,
sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
is there anything else you want to add?
Oh, only I suppose I use No Money, No Time a fair bit in my clinical work because I find that, a lot of these barriers that people face, not wanting to stand up in the kitchen for long periods, not having, a lot of money and wanting to have something quick and easy. I think it's a great resource for people living with pain as well.
Yeah, and just a reminder that you can sort the recipes based on not just price, but things like what you want to make, whether what meal and what oven, whether you want to use an oven or you want to use a
Yeah,
air fryer or whatever, just a one pot, whatever. Well, Dr.
yeah.
Katherine Brain, thank you for your time and talking to us today about nutrition and chronic pain.
No problem. Thank you very much.